must come out. We are what we eat. And it takes fuel to run the engine. Those are all sayings that have one thing in common, and that is they're all designed to make us think carefully about nutrition. Every healthcare and athletic coach assures us that what we put into our bodies determines our ability to function. If we eat the right stuff, we're going to function better than if we eat the wrong stuff. What goes into our bodies makes a difference. Now, eating the right stuff was very important to observant Jews in the first century. The belief was some food was clean, some food was unclean. The books attributed to Moses detail what foods were considered clean and what foods were considered unclean. A clean diet would result in thoughts, words, and actions that allowed one to be close to God. An unclean diet, well, that would allow behaviors that moved one farther away from God. The temple priests believed with all of their hearts that a clean diet was essential to being close to God. Now, Jesus was just not as concerned about a clean diet as the Pharisees wanted him to be, because Jesus knew closeness to God was not the result of eating a clean diet. In fact, Jesus said the food you put into your mouth doesn't make you clean or unclean. It doesn't make you clean or unfit to worship God. It's the bad words that come out of our mouths. That's what makes us unclean. Now, my hunch is most of us here this morning do not follow a biblically clean diet. We find those clean and unclean foods listed mostly in the book of Leviticus. So for an example, if we eat shrimp or lobster or cheeseburgers or bacon, we're eating an unclean diet. If we eat casseroles, chances are we're eating an unclean diet. If we like our steak medium rare, well, we're eating an unclean diet. Now, most of us know that our thoughts, words, and actions are not determined by what we eat. Instead, our thoughts, words, and actions are determined by what we hear, what we watch, what we read, and who we spend time with. Our thoughts and words and actions are a result of our beliefs, not our food. The way we treat others, the way we treat creation, the way we treat animals, the way we treat everyone and everything is determined by the messages that we have absorbed since the day we were born. Now, many of us are still horrified and saddened by the events in Charlottesville this last weekend. And many of us are amazed in both a good way and not so good way by the rhetoric that has come from the mouths of our families, our friends, and our national leaders as a result of those events. Rhetoric, meaning persuasive language, is coming from all sides. And if you read the church's Facebook post, and if you didn't, why not? If you read the church's Facebook post, you'll notice that I even published my own rhetoric. It seems that everyone has a thought about the actions of those participating in the Unite the Right rally. And everyone has a thought about the actions of those who protested that rally. And Jesus, along with modern-day psychologists, parenting experts, and scientists, would say that our thoughts are the products of our homes in which we were raised, the people we currently spend time with, the thoughts that we choose to accept and nurture, as well as the thoughts we choose to reject, what we read and what we watch. And what comes out of our mouths, the behaviors that we exhibit, and the thoughts we nurture all find their roots in the people, experiences, and entertainment with which we fill our lives. For instance, I grew up in a small town, Baraboo, Wisconsin, and it was an all-white community. Only white people lived there, grew up there, or worked there. And the television programs I watched in the 60s, well, 99% of the people in the actors were white faces. The only African-American people I remember seeing on TV were Sammy Davis Jr., Nat King Cole, and Muhammad Ali. And my parents' only comment about those three iconic African-American figures was, well, they were pretty good, considering they're black. Maybe I'm not the only one that had that kind of experience. Maybe I'm not the only one who grew up in an all-white community, with parents who did the best they could, but were also living the thoughts that had been planted in their lives as they were growing up. You see, the culture in which we lived, intentionally and mostly unintentionally, ensured that those of us who grew up in our small towns, and those of us who are still growing up in our small towns, have a built-in prejudice. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our words, and our actions, well, they're formed by the environments in which we grow up. And all of that means is most of us have to work really, really hard to unlearn our prejudices. Most of us have to work really hard to accept the fact that we do not deserve position, status, power, opportunity, and rewards any more than those who don't look, speak, and act like us. Most of us have to work really, really hard to be okay with the fact that those of us who don't look, speak, act, or think, or behave the way we do have the rights to equal, if not more, power, status, and rewards than we do. And most of us, in our heart of hearts, have to work at overriding the prejudice that dwells deep inside of us in places we try not to let out in public too often. Now, the temple priests did not like Jesus because he threatened the power, position, and rewards that they received simply because they were priests. The temple priests didn't like it at all that this poor, unwashed, homeless, rule-breaking peasant collected a large group of followers who actually demanded justice from the temple priests. The temple priests did not like it when Jesus and his followers held a rally on Palm Sunday, and they really didn't like anything about this upstart who should have known his place. And so they killed him. And let's face it, friends, when we are king, it is really hard to give up the throne. When we are the ones who have power and position and status, it's really hard to say, but everyone else deserves that also. If we as individuals and as a nation are ever going to be a place where all people know that they are created equal, and where all people get to experience the promise that was made in our Declaration of Independence, when all come to know through experience that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, well then, friends, we all have to deal with our prejudices. When we find ourselves afraid to walk through Washington Park, it's time to get a friend and walk through Washington Park and talk to the basketball players and the people sitting at the picnics and the mothers and the fathers who have their children on the playground. When we cross the street, rather than walk by certain groups of people, it's time for us to stay on that same side of the street, smile, say hello, and ask, how are you? When we find ourselves thinking unkind thoughts, and sometimes expressing those unkind thoughts to, the people who would get it, the people who would understand, it's time to change our thoughts. And when we find ourselves laughing at jokes that insult a group or a race of people, it's time to change our sense of humor. And when we find ourselves surrounded by a group of people who share and encourage our prejudices, it's time to get some new friends. I've come to the conclusion that it's time for all of us to get down on our knees before our God and dig deep in our hearts and confess our prejudices. And while we're down on our knees, it's time to ask God to help us repent and to invite God to change our hearts and our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. It's time for us to ask God to give us the courage to think and speak and act like real followers of Jesus Christ, who know that all people are created equal and all people are loved equally by our God, who know that all people are created in the image and the likeness of God, people who know that the only way that our souls, our communities, and our nation will heal is by admitting how much we need healing. And it's time. It's way past time. Because it's not the food that we put into our mouths that makes us unclean. It is the words that come out of our mouths. It is the thoughts that we nurture in our minds. And it is the actions that we take that make us unclean. And it is time for all of us to clean up. Amen.